Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us at India Science Festival's Day 5. We're very excited to have all of you present with us virtually, while we would have loved to host you all in an on-ground, offline setting. Due to the pandemic, our festival is being held online, and we sincerely hope that you're all keeping safe, masking up, and taking care of your health. My name is Shruti Sundaresan, and on behalf of the entire team at ISF and FAST India, I welcome you all to Day 5 of India's largest virtual celebration of science. I'd like to quickly take a moment to thank our back-end moderators, Parth and Shubh, who are going to be relaying all the updates of our events live to you all on Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, and Facebook. Just a quick introduction about the festival. India Science Festival is a flagship event under the science communication vertical of the Foundation for Advancing Science and Technology, and the acronym is FAST India. ISF aims to celebrate science and connect young people and the general members of the public with scientists, researchers, public engagement practitioners, industry professionals, and innovators. This festival is going to feature top-class researchers from all over the world. This is an excellent opportunity to meet scientists, public engagement practitioners, researchers who are going to engage in talks, fireside chats, panel discussions, workshops, competitions, contests, and more. And this festival is absolutely open to all. Our events are free to attend, and there's something to do for everybody at this festival. So do make sure that you participate. The festival is on from the 8th to the 23rd of January. You can access all of our events on our website. We'll drop in a link in the chat, and you'll be able to navigate your way through our website where all of our events are mentioned. Make sure to register to get regular updates. Like I mentioned, this is a really great opportunity to participate, network, learn, share, analyze, compete, and at the end of the day, celebrate science. A very quick note on the housekeeping rules for this session. We would really appreciate if everybody dropped in their questions for the speaker in the Q&A tab. We will try our best to cover them towards the end of the session. Absolutely no profanity will be tolerated in the course of the webinar. ISF reserves the rights to remove attendees from the webinar room. And all of our webinars will be recorded, so feel free to head over to our YouTube channel to check out all the events that are happening. I would just really like to know a little bit about our attendees. Before we move into the first session for today, I'm going to launch a very quick poll on all of your screens, and we would really love to know the answers for these questions. They are very quick 4 questions that you'll see on your screens. And please feel free to answer them. All of our polls are anonymous. We will not get to know what individuals have answered. So please be candid when you answer these polls. So the first question that we have here is, do you think scientists play an important role in our lives? Yes, maybe, no. The second question is, were you aware of the names of popular scientists and researchers before the COVID-19 pandemic? The third question is, did you see interviews and clippings of scientists, doctors, and researchers on social media, print media, and television during the pandemic? And the last question is, do you think the COVID-19 pandemic has resulted in putting more scientists, researchers, and doctors in the limelight? Please tell us what you think. We will very quickly flash the results of this poll on your screen so that you're able to see what everybody has said. We'll just wait for a few more seconds until we have everybody's answers. Okay, let me very quickly end the poll and share the results with all of you. All right, so very positive note that 100% of our attendees think that scientists play an important role in our lives. That's a really positive note. 77% of our attendees were aware of the names of popular scientists and researchers before the COVID-19 pandemic, whereas 23% were not aware. 43% of our attendees saw interviews and clippings of scientists very regularly through the course of the pandemic. 43% saw them sometimes, and 14% saw them very rarely. And the last poll is, of course, 86% of our attendees think that, yes, we are definitely paying a lot more attention to our scientists, researchers, and doctors in the course of this pandemic. 14% are not very sure. That's perfectly fine. I think with that, we will, it gives me great pleasure in inviting our speaker for today. Can I please request Dr. Marina to please turn on her audio and video? Marina, we're so excited to host you at India Science Festival. It's an absolute pleasure to host you at the virtual version of this festival. A very quick introduction for our speaker here with over 25 years of experience in the field of SciComm practice, capacity building, teaching, and academic research. Marina has earned national and international recognition as one of the global pioneers and leaders in the field of science communication. She is joining us all the way from South Africa, and she was also a very instrumental part of our SciComm conclave that was held in December. Marina, it is such a pleasure to host you, and you have absolutely, you have given so much to the festival already, and we're so excited to know what you have planned for us through the course of this event. Like I mentioned, Marina will take us through the course of her talk, and then we'll take questions towards the end of the session. So Marina, without any further delay, over to you.
Yes, Shruti, thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. I must just say it's a privilege for me to be a part of India Science Festival. It really is something special for me. It's starting off my year on a highlight. And I also want to commend you on the way that you introduce the sessions, and because one of the rules of science communication is, to be enthusiastic, to be energetic, to be engaging about it, and to build in those interactive elements. And you do it also well. And also, looking at the poll questions and also the responses from today's audience, so it's really encouraging to see, how COVID-19 has put the spotlight on science. It's really been like a living laboratory for science communication the last 2 years. And therefore, I'm really excited to share this topic with you today about celebrity scientists during the pandemic. Now, I've quickly got to see if I can pass the test of making sure that I get the presentation right. Share screen right and all of that, and I depend on you to tell me if anything is not exactly as it should be.
It's perfectly all right, Marina. We can see you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. So thank you so much again for this opportunity. This topic of celebrity scientists really fascinates me, because we often think of scientists, and this is something that's often said in science communication as well, that they are not good communicators, that they like to work on their own, hidden away in their labs or in their offices, and that they're not actually keen to be in the public eye. And so when we think about scientists that become really visible in the public eye, or even celebrities, it means that they are exceptional somehow. They've broken those rules. They've sort of merged their scientific life with public life, and therefore they are very, very interesting to study. Of course, I don't agree in principle to say that scientists are not good communicators. I think all scientists, can communicate and engage the public in some way or another. But also when we look at these scientists that really make it to the top of visibility and celebrity, they do appear to be something different. But what is particularly interesting for me is, what can we learn from them? What can other scientists also learn from them about engaging with the public? Now, when we look back in the history of science, a few names stand out, and there are many. I've only included a few examples here of the most scientists, the most famous scientists of all time. I should just make sure why. I wonder why this screen is not. There it is. Okay. So a few names that stand out, for example, it would be Alexander von Humboldt, Charles Darwin, Albert Einstein. These scientists enjoy a high standing in science, but they're also remembered for their high public profiles. Now, looking back, of course, when you look at this, if you do something like, for example, a Google search on visible scientists during the ages, you typically get a spread of names and faces like these. And something that you very quickly will notice is that the sort of hall of fame of science is dominated by men, and many of these are white men, not all of them. They're not all male, they're not all white, but it's dominated by white men. So that's something that scholars of celebrity scientists have also noted. When we look, for example, at visible scientists in India, in the history of India, India has its fair share of famous scientists who became very well known, not only in India, but around the world. But once again, you may notice that images of famous Indian scientists, just as I find them on a Google search, seem to be almost exclusively male. So my own interest in these visible scientists and scientists that are top scientists in their field, but who also make time for engaging with the public in an exceptional way, started way back when I was a young sort of science communicator working at South Africa's National Research Foundation. And in that job, I had the opportunity to really engage with some of South Africa's top scientists. And I'll never forget this afternoon that I spent with the enigmatic Professor Philip Tobias. He's one of the icons of science, or he was at least one of the icons of science in South Africa. And even though he was this top scientist, highly rated, highly in demand, I was really impressed and kind of noted the way that he really made time for me and for the photographer, how patient he was, how he really took his time to explain his work to us, how he posed with different skulls and artifacts for the photographer. And this is something that really made an impression on me. And so years later, when I had the opportunity to do a PhD myself, I wanted to focus on this topic of these really enigmatic visible scientists. And I came across this wonderful dissertation by Ray Goodall that she already wrote way back in 1975. And she studied the visible scientists at the time. And the way that she's written this dissertation, it almost reads like a novel. It's really something that I couldn't put down. And she described the visible scientists of the time as being fearless, intensely competitive and ambitious. She also says that they were strong and assertive individuals who thrived at the center of attention. So I started by reading everything I could find about Ray Goodall's work and what she wrote about these visible scientists, including a set of brilliant profiles that is included in her dissertation. And in some of the material she wrote about them, she also added by saying that what makes them visible scientists typically is they have a hot topic. They're usually somewhat controversial, or at least their topic is controversial. They're highly articulate. They have a colorful image, appearance, and personality. They touch the right chords with the public. They are competitive and ambitious. They enjoy credibility within science. That is a very important thing to add. So it's not only that they're popular with the public, their colleagues also acknowledge that they are actually top scientists. And that is very important to protect them when they may face some criticism. So at the time, the only South African scientist that was mentioned in her study was Christiaan Barnard. And this makes a lot of sense because Goodall's study was done in the 70s and late in the 1960s, actually on 3 December 1967, the South African heart surgeon Christiaan Barnard became world famous overnight after successfully transplanting a human heart. And it's a fascinating story that I could talk about for a long time. People who live, who can remember back to the 70s and 80s and even 90s will probably remember his name. He remained famous for the rest of his life and dined with, Hollywood film stars and presidents and queens and kings and so on. And it's a very fascinating story of how he balanced, remaining a world-class surgeon and doing several more pioneering heart transplants and other heart surgeries with, also being very famous and with sort of maintaining that celebrity status. So at the time, I wrote a few commentaries about Christiaan Barnard and his route to a global media sensation. And this coincided with the 50th anniversary of the world's first human heart transplant in 2017. So I was lucky because people were interested, once again, people were looking back on 50 years since the first human heart transplant. And it gave me an opportunity to publish a few items about Christiaan Barnard as a scientific celebrity. Now, if we look at some of the characteristics of visible scientists as described by Goodall, but also several other scholars since then, we see that they are generally described as active popularizers who become recognizable public figures, who enjoy significant public attention, but importantly are also able to influence public attention. This means that, this high celebrity status comes with a certain level of responsibility as well. We also see that there's a recognition that these visible scientists are unusual. They are typically not the norm. They usually emerge when unusual or exceptional circumstances coincide with exceptional individuals. And of course, if you think of exceptional circumstances, COVID-19 would be a good trigger for that as well. And one of the reasons why they are so unusual is also their media efforts and abilities. So we see that they're able to deal with the conflicting demands of science and the media. They're able to invest, or they're willing at least to invest time and effort in the media. We also notice that they are praised by their peers and by the public, but also criticized. It's definitely a risk for scientists to become so visible because they open themselves up to a lot of criticism also from their peers. Now, I'm particularly interested also in the case of Barnard, in how unusual they are when they deal with the media. If you think back to 1967, South Africa did not even yet have television at the time. So it's quite remarkable that Christian Barnard was so confident in front of the television cameras. He had hardly any media experience. He definitely did not have any media training. And so it's quite remarkable how well he coped with demands from around the world for media appearances. A very specific example that actually a whole book was written about is a 1-hour television program that was broadcast about a bit more than a month after his heart transplant breakthrough. He traveled to London and he was a live guest, so it was all live on the BBC One's Tomorrow's World. Now, they invited people to this event who were critical of Barnard. So the official title of the show was Barnard Faces His Critics. So there were people in the audience, and you can see the audience was largely male as well, who were there to criticize him. They were both peers from the medical world, but also from the clergy and also from the general public. So people who were questioning the morals of what he did, the ethics of what he did, the scientific validity of what he did, because by that time, of course, the first patient had already died. But Barnard was remarkable, the way he turned the questions around, the way he got the audience onto his side, the way he got the journalists onto his side. It's really remarkable. Actually, this whole 1-hour program that dates back to 1968 is available on the archives of BBC to watch. And it's really remarkable to see how he was able to turn the whole thing around. And afterwards, when people referred to this event, it was called the Chris Barnard Show instead of Barnard Faces His Critics. And that was already an indication of his success in handling the criticism, but also acknowledgement that he was becoming a celebrity. Another aspect of Barnard that was notable and that we also see in celebrity scientists today is the way that you could explain complex medical terms in ways, or procedures in ways that people could understand. In contrast with other scientists at the time, he did not use medical jargon when he talked to the press. He helped to demystify heart transplant surgery by using simple sketches and simple explanations. And he actually became famous for saying that heart transplant surgery, heart transplant was nothing special and the heart was just a pump. So we see, from these examples that high media visibility is something that leads to celebrity status. You really cannot become a celebrity in the mass media without it. It's sort of a precondition. So these scientists know how to amplify their views via the media. They know how to take advantage of media opportunities. They develop strong relationships and sophisticated interactions with journalists and with the media, and they're able to adapt to the logic or the demands of the media. They know what the media wants and they know how to give it to them. Now, what we see, it's very, very interesting to read what other scholars have said. You have studied celebrities like Einstein and Dawkins and Darwin and names like that. And it is important to draw a line between what do we mean by a celebrity scientist and what do we mean by a highly visible scientist. So we see that they define celebrity scientists as those that have really achieved a kind of star status. They've become a household name. So if I say Einstein, it's very likely that most people around the world will immediately have a picture in their mind. They will know who we're talking about. But we also noticed then that there are only a very, very small number of these highly visible scientists right at the top of the structure of scientists or scientific hierarchy. So they are, one can also call them the superstars of science. And in a way, they are similar to the superstars in soccer or in entertainment, those few names that everybody around the world is likely to know who you're talking about. So similar to what we find then, of course, in the world of entertainment and sport. We also see that there is kind of a logical progression from being visible to becoming a celebrity. They sort of build on one another. You have to be, of course, you have to be visible first before you can become a celebrity. And it's kind of a shift in the time when Goodall did her PhD. She spoke about the visible scientist. The concept of celebrity wasn't that well known. But in the 21st century, the concept of celebrity, of course, became much better known. And it also indicates how science is increasingly become part of scientific, of popular culture as well. And we have to acknowledge, of course, that not all highly visible scientists will become celebrities. And this is important when we look at a visible scientists of the pandemic to ask ourselves, did they become highly visible or did they really become celebrities? And what are the implications of that? So in more recent works, people tend to focus on celebrity scientists. For example, this book written by Declan Fay in 2015. When he talks about celebrity scientists, he says they are articulate, controversial, and distinctive. He describes them as stars that grip the public imagination. And Fay says it's about how they communicate. Their topic is tied to something that is important to the public at that moment. But interestingly, he adds that they must be interesting as personalities. They must have a compelling presence and they must have good looks. He describes these celebrity scientists as a new scientific elite that have an impact, on public life, that allows them to spread their ideas, influence policymakers, defend science, and promote a culture of science in society. So we see that they can be influential, and that is, of course, why it's important to study them and just understand what influence they have. They're also described by some scholars as thought leaders and powerful influencers. So the way that these scientists have an influence is because they can shape public discussions. They often supply a human dimension to science, personifying or personalizing things that may otherwise seem quite abstract. And they have a social function in the sense that they help people make sense of the world. We certainly saw that during the pandemic, how people would trust specific scientists and they would have kind of peace and confidence if they followed the advice of specific scientists that they felt they could trust. So what's interesting to note is how scholars discuss this concept of celebrity and that there's not necessarily agreement about whether scientific celebrities are bad or good for society. So you can ask yourself, if they have this influence, if they can make people trust science, if they can give people confidence and build public trust in science, what could be the problem? Why would celebrities not be a good thing? And the reason why some people are critical of these public celebrities in science is that they say that some people become widely known and well known because of their media skills, because of their good looks, because of their personalities, and that they're not necessarily happy when their acclaim depends more on their appearance and their media skills than their actual scientific credibility. But at the same time, there seems to be widespread agreement that when these scientists do enjoy scientific credibility as well as public acclaim, it's an opportunity that should not be wasted, because these scientists have the ability to combat pseudoscience, to promote scientific literacy, to motivate young people, and to steer public discussions and to help people make more and better informed decisions about science. So what's also very interesting for me to note is that within these visible scientists themselves, they're not necessarily always certain about whether it's a good thing to be so visible. Some of these scientists, when they become highly visible, they may actually begin to step back. They may begin to become uncomfortable. So one of the colleagues in science communication, Simone Roder, she's a German science communication researcher, wrote this sentence, which I found really interesting. And she says, to be visible, meeting the expectations to communicate with the extra scientific public And to be a scientist bound to the normative structure of science is an ambiguity that is built into the role of visible scientists. And once again, certainly when we look back on history, there are many examples of scientists who paid a high price when they became very famous. A very well-known example is Carl Sagan. For me, he really epitomized the balancing act of being a serious scientist on the one hand, but also an active popularizer. Now, on this front cover of Time magazine that dates back to October 1980, you see that he is characterized as a showman of science. Now, that is a label that many scientists won't feel comfortable with, certainly not for themselves, and also not for one of their peers. And many of you, especially those of you who have studied science communication, may remember that he was one of the scientists that really paid a high price. He was excluded from specific advantages and benefits within the scientific community because his colleagues and peers felt that it was not suitable for a serious scientist to be on television every evening and to be so popular. And today, even today, we still talk about the Sagan effect when referring to scientists who are criticized or shunned by their peers for their popularization activities. Now, let me move on to the situation we are now and the study we are doing now about visible scientists of the COVID-19 pandemic. In science magazines and in the popular media and in some magazines about research and higher education, we noticed early on some commentaries about how COVID-19 is turning some scientists into household names. And also commenting on them, criticizing them to some extent. In this example, they are referred to as rising heroes of the coronavirus era. In this example, they're even referred to as sex symbols and rule breakers. Here's an example of something that was written about something that I wrote where Professor Salim Abdul Karim in South Africa is referred to as a media star. This is an interesting example of an article about an Italian scientist who is referred to as a scientist who has become a celebrity by fighting vaccine skeptics. And you see there that there's reference to the fact that he has fans on the one hand, but he's also dismayed by others. Some of these scientists became very, very well known within their own countries. Some also became wider known beyond their own countries, especially those who served on big international bodies. And I think one of the scientists that did become known beyond the borders of his own country because of the politics of the time and of course the sort of last months of the Trump era or the last year or so of the Trump era was of course Dr. Anthony Fauci in the United States. He's a very interesting example to study because he might have been one of the most visible scientists globally of COVID-19. And in his case, you can see how he was commodified. There's Fauci fan clubs on social media. There's lots of Fauci merchandise for sale. Lots of people who really, really support him strongly. But of course, he also has those who really didn't agree. And typically of the polarized politics in the United States, people who really opposed him and who wouldn't hesitate to even call for him. I mean, in this example, there's a person carrying a poster, hang Fauci, hang Gates. Strong views and very polarized views, which is also, of course, very typical of American politics. So currently, I'm now involved in this study where I'm working with 25 other researchers across a group of countries, 16 countries to be exact, where we are looking at scientists who became very famous. And we want to see what can we learn from that and what can we learn about science communication and the interaction between science and society by studying these very visible scientists. So we ask a few questions. Who emerged as the celebrity scientists in these countries? And in each country, we chose the scientists that became the most visible according to certain criteria. And we ask ourselves why, what were the triggers that made them so visible? We match their profiles and their reputations to the characteristics of visible scientists that were studied before, from history. And we also look at some of the risks and controversies that they experienced during the pandemic. So very briefly, some of our very preliminary findings that we already can share with you is that the average age, and I measured their ages on 1 January, so right at the start of the pandemic, was 58 years old. So you can clearly see that they're fairly senior, which which goes, hand in hand with what we know from before, that they're already in leadership positions, they're already well established in their fields. We also see that of the 16 countries we are studying, 81% of them are males, so 13 out of the 16. At least we do have 3 women in there. And then we see that 12 of them were involved in some or other controversies, and at least 6 of them were involved in some or other allegations of misconduct. So we can already see that they match many of the characteristics of celebrity scientists that were identified before, long before the pandemic. So very briefly, I'm going to just show you, without spending too much time on it, the names that we are actually studying. It's Peter Doherty in Australia, Attila Imerano in Brazil, Horacio Arruda in Canada, Wenhong Zhang in China, Lorne Simonsen in Denmark, Christian Drosten in Germany, Sumaya Swaminathan in India, Anthony Fauci in the United States, of course, and let me just quickly, Ronnie Gamzu in Israel, and then Roberto Bironi in Italy, Patrick Amos in Kenya, Alexander Ginsburg in Russia. So you can see it's an interesting spread, and we are currently still busy with this study. So what I would like to do with the last bit of my presentation that is left, I wanted to tell you a little bit more about the South African case, because I thought you would also find it very interesting. Professor Salim Abdul Karim is for me, a fascinating case study. He is also of Indian descent, which may add some interest also for the audience today. And I want to start today, this part of my presentation, with a small clip where he was interviewed by a journalist, and she asked him about lessons learned during the pandemic. And I thought, if you listen carefully to his responses, it's so fascinating to hear what he says, how he comments on communication of science also during the pandemic. So let's listen to this short video clip.
Months for you, but what have we learnt this past year that we need to keep in mind as we go into a second year of this virus?
There are many lessons to take away. I'll just highlight 3 of them. The first, for me, was the importance of taking the disease seriously. I've been through other epidemics where we didn't take it as seriously, but in this particular instance, we took it seriously, we acted decisively, and we made decisions that were unpopular, and they needed to be made, and they needed to be made bravely. And that was really important because, as Neil Ferguson has shown in the UK, a week later, and that doubled the number of deaths. So a 1-week delay in their lockdown cost them heavily. But we were fortunate. Our leadership was willing to make those difficult decisions. Second is, I've been amazed at how much of communication there is. I mean, I've been involved in many other epidemics. Nowhere do you get a daily press release telling you about the number of cases, telling you about new variants, and national television press briefings. I've never seen science communicated in this kind of way, in the transparency, in the openness and the communication that I've seen. Now, we can always do better, but what we are seeing is quite amazing. And the third, I have just marveled at South Africa. We can do anything. We can move mountains if, we put our minds to it.
Months for you, but what have we learned?
Sorry, so I think if we look at Professor Salim Abdul Karim as an example, and if we analyze his media appearances like that one clip which I just showed as an example, you get an idea of the reasons why he became so popular and why he's so widely trusted. So let's just quickly trace back a few steps. We see that if we look at his track record, he was already a leading figure in science before the pandemic. There is no doubt that he was an international figure and enjoyed very high scientific celebrity, and credibility. That was before the pandemic started. His CV was 62 pages long when he sent it to me at the beginning of the pandemic. Spans high-level organizations like the United Nations, the World Health Organization, high-level appointments at universities like Harvard, Cornell, and Columbia. He's a member of the US National Academy of Sciences. He's a fellow of the Royal Society. The number of awards and prizes that he's received over the years, just simply far too many to list. He has a very big research group. He is well funded, of course, for his research. We also see that he already had a long track record of activism. Long before COVID-19, he was well known as an activist and also an AIDS activist. This is an example, this photo really speaks volumes to me. It was taken in the streets of Durban, South Africa in April 2018. And you can see, typical for Karim to take center stage, he's marching for science in the streets of Durban with his colleagues, with patients. So he didn't stay in his lab, he stepped out onto the streets and he became part of the public conversation. And then, of course, when COVID-19 struck, that was the moment when it really provided the opportunity for him to become a household name. He was already well known to health journalists, but he wasn't a household name. But then, soon after he was appointed to lead a ministerial committee on COVID-19, he took part in a live televised briefing of 1 hour, and that was the turning point. After that, a flood of media interviews and webinars followed, because the people liked what they heard, they liked the way he spoke, they could understand what he said. And importantly, he was willing to engage and he made time for the media. He was willing during this time of crisis to put some of his other work and even his AIDS research to one side, because he realized that this was an opportunity and he had an important role to play in building public trust during this pandemic. So as a result, he featured in close to 550 print and broadcast stories in just 1 month, April 2020. This, I would say, the first full month, of the pandemic in South Africa specifically. 550 media stories in 1 month, and it was sustained for quite a long time, at least until the end of 2020. He sustained a very high media profile. When you look at, he was so exceptional that journalists also commented on the way he spoke. So, for example, in this City Press story, Vuyo Mkhize wrote that he had millions of South Africans glued to their screens, collectively eating out of the palm of his hand. So this says something about his style of communication and the way that he was really able to capture the public attention and get people to trust him. So I've been looking at Professor Karim, his video interviews, his television appearances, his webinars, his print interviews, and there are a few things that you can take from that and that we can learn from. Of course, the first thing is the credibility. He does come with a reputation. He is a scientist that is trusted and respected by other scientists. But then the fact that he was willing to engage with the media and make time for it, his clear messages, the way he used plain language and simple explanations and metaphors and stories. Very importantly, he combined all of this with warmth. He made a connection with the audience. He often used language like, I'm sorry for what you are all going through. I understand that we're all together going through a difficult time. I wish I could give you better news. He made you feel like he was living through the pandemic with you. He wasn't cold and distant. He really made that connection with the audience, and that made a huge difference. Very importantly, he often talked about the process of science, why he gave certain advice, why he couldn't give the advice yet, why he was still waiting for the peer review, why it wasn't dangerous to speculate on the safety of something or new advice. And he explained how science works to help people understand that scientists can't just give advice if they don't have all the evidence yet. And then, yes, that X factor was definitely there. We see that when journalists wrote about him, for example, in this experience, one of them wrote about his voice as being authoritative and warm and uncompromising. And they also wrote about his appearance. In this case, the journalist talks about his goatee, his beard and his strong jawline that helped to make him credible and trusted. And when you look at images of Professor Karim in the media, he was always professionally dressed. He was but warm and smiling, and just overall a sort of a public figure that people felt they could identify with. He had his fair share of controversy during the debate. He often found himself in difficult situations. He was always kind of the voice for reason and for making peace between scientists when controversies erupted. And throughout the pandemic, his scientific credibility remained intact. He was never accused of, breaking any of the rules or ignoring the same advice that he was giving to other people, as happened with some other scientific celebrities. He won a string of awards, of course, before the pandemic, but also during and since the pandemic, he has received even more prizes. And he was the co-recipient, along with Anthony Fauci, for the 2020 John Maddox Prize. And recently, he was invited to join the Science Council of the World Health Organization. So you can see that he remained at a very, very high level. Yes, what another sort of characteristic of celebrity is that people become interested in the man behind the scientist or the woman behind the scientist. They want to know more. They don't want to know only about the science. They want to know about his family life. And there's been a fair number of articles about his family life, his background, his upbringing, how he became a scientist, what actually was his motivations for doing AIDS research and then for getting involved in the pandemic. And a number of articles also featured on his family and his wife, who's also a very, very high level, equally well-respected scientist, and even the couple's 3 children and their story. So people do want to know, and many celebrity scientists have found this out. If there is any scandal there, the media will also uncover that. So that's one of the risks. But in his case, I'm not aware that there were any scandals that they did uncover. So I've written a piece about Professor Salim Abdul Karim as a media star during COVID-19, where I've kind of analyzed why he became so popular, what made him a celebrity. And I think the most important fact for me is that he was able to combine credibility and warmth. Because if scientists are only credible, they can appear to be competent but cold. But in his case, he was credible, but he was also a human being. He was humanizing the pandemic, he was humanizing the science, and that made a very, very big difference. And so I'm very, very happy to engage with anyone who have, if you have questions about this research or about this topic. And I hope that once we've concluded the study on the 16 visible scientists, I may be able to share some of the results with you in future. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you so much, Marina. It was an absolute pleasure listening to this entire talk. And I must say that the visuals and the videos that you included were so engaging. I mean, I really couldn't take my eyes off the screen even once. And I'm sure it was really pleasurable for all the attendees to listen to this talk. And also very insightful, I must say. Now we have a bunch of questions that we've collected from all over, a Q&A tab over here, as well as the social media where we're live streaming on YouTube. All right, so the first question that we have here is, this person seems to have seen your work outside of the festival too. So they say that I have been following Dr. Marina's work for a bit. I want to know why psychom research isn't very popular all over the world.
Oh, that's an interesting one. So I would say that science communication as an academic field, as a research field, is still fairly young. As we became, I would say since about the 1980s, roughly, and I'm generalizing now, it was different in every country, but more or less around the 1980s, we became more aware globally of the need to involve the public more, to build public trust in science, that scientists couldn't just be left alone and trusted, because the public wanted to have a say, it needed to be democratized, that public support and public involvement was important and could actually improve science. So from then onwards, around the world, universities started paying attention to this, and they started developing academic courses. And we see that same pattern in South Africa. We started first with practice. So people started organizing science festivals like this one, and events and science centers were built all around the world. And then we began to realize, but we can't just keep on doing this practice. We need to know what works and what doesn't work. We need an evidence base for what we're doing. So as an academic field, science communication is quite young. In some countries, it started really maturing in the 1990s, but even beyond 2000. In South Africa, for example, we only have one university where I teach, offering a master's program that focuses on, to some extent at least, on science communication. Of course, science communication as a research field builds on earlier fields like sociology of science and philosophy of science. It's not plucked out of the air. It builds on other academic disciplines, even psychology and sociology, etc. But focused on science communication is new. So all I can say is thank you for following my work, and please become a part of science communication research. And it's very important that we must build connections between the practitioners and the researchers.
Thank you so much, Marina. Here's hoping that in the coming years, we really push for more resources towards psychom research. And on that note, I'll move to the next question. It's actually very interesting. So our attendee has said that in a country like ours, the celebrity status seems to be placed only with Bollywood film stars or very famous cricket players. How can we possibly start looking at scientists as celebrities?
So the difficult question is, when do we actually decide, or how do we decide, when is a scientist actually a celebrity? And it's not an easy one to answer, but you would go back to those characteristics. To what extent can you say that this is a household name? To what extent does this person have influence on the public debate? To what extent is this person a role model? All these things. And if you find that the answer is yes to most of those questions, I guess then you can argue that this person has agreed some degree of celebrity status. If you ask me if I think whether Professor Salim Abdul Karim in South Africa is a celebrity, similar to a sports celebrity or a film star, I think I would actually have to say no, because he's certainly well known, he's certainly highly visible, but he hasn't. I think if he walks down the street, you're not going to find lots of paparazzi following him, and people will recognize him, and some people may ask him for a autograph, but it's not going to be like crowds waiting at the airport to welcome him, which happened in the case of Christian Barnard, the heart transplant surgeon. I mean, he was followed around by paparazzi, he was crowded by crowds of people wherever he went. But I don't think it matters that much, as long as these visible scientists or celebrity scientists use their influence for the public good. I think that's what really matters.
Thank you so much. I do think that there is a certain amount of glamour associated with films and sports that maybe science doesn't offer yet. Yeah, that's the way we look at things. So the next question that we have here is, have you shared your findings with the scientific community or the celebrity scientists covered in your studies? How do you see your research influencing budding scientists and the larger scientific enterprise?
I just want to make sure I heard the question correctly. Do you ask how this study may influence other scientists? Is that more or less what you're asking?
Yeah.
Okay. So I think the first thing I want to say is it's not possible or even necessary for all scientists to become highly visible. I think it's important to acknowledge that. But when they do engage, even on a small scale, even within their local communities, there are certain things that we can learn from these visible scientists. For example, showing empathy with your audience, using plain language, telling stories, using metaphors, being a human being, understanding that if you can engage with people as a human being and not only as a scientist, it's more effective. So that's what I want to achieve. We want to lift from our study of these celebrity scientists the success factors for engagement, and see if we can use that to help other scientists who may still be building their confidence. Because I think it's also good to acknowledge that not all of these scientists became celebrities overnight. Many of them also built their confidence and their experience over time. We see that typically, I mean, Christian Barnard was an exception because he became suddenly famous overnight, but it was a very unusual situation. But many scientists are fairly older in their lives before they reach this kind of stardom, and over time they've built their experience, they've built their image, and I think that I hope that taking note of that and acknowledging what works and what doesn't work is part of this evidence base for effective engagement. And I want to maybe just mention one other thing about sort of merging scientific celebrity and sort of popular culture. What I found really interesting is when you see that scientists who are very well known actually appear in popular culture. Now, one example that I can immediately think of now is in the Big Bang Theory series. And I think you all know Big Bang Theory because it was well known around the world. If you look back now, the series ran for many years, but there were a few cases when really well-known scientists made appearances in there. For example, you may remember Neil deGrasse Tyson was in one of the series, as well as Stephen Hawking. He was in one of the series. So this is for me a good example of how we can bring the two together and sort of bring the scientific voice into a form of popular culture that is well known around the world.
you. That makes a lot of sense. And I definitely do believe that, that slide that you showed us about what Professor Karim did right and what are some learning, and the fact that, he always touched the emotional quotient of the audience was a very good takeaway. Okay, so the next question that we have here is, okay, what are some ways to make scientists and researchers more comfortable to show their presence on television and social media? Like you mentioned, not everybody can become a celebrity, but they can take a little more effort to be seen in the media. So what are some ways that we can make researchers more comfortable?
Okay. Scientists must find their own niche. They shouldn't be forced into social media if that doesn't work for them, or they shouldn't be forced onto a public stage or in front of a television camera. I think different scientists have different skills and different, characteristics, and they must find what works for them. They must find their own voice. I think celebrity scientists can influence them positively in the sense of showing that it is possible to be in the public eye, but also at the same time remain a serious scientist. It becomes more normatively acceptable in a way. It has, since the time of Carl Sagan in the 70s, it certainly has become more acceptable. As governments and science funders are increasingly calling for scientists to become more visible and to engage with society, and when funders are calling for it, it becomes more acceptable to do it. But at the same time, my advice would be for young scientists to be aware of the risks, not to go into it blindly, to plan it, to get help from professional science communicators, to be careful, because being visible and being in the public eye does come with a responsibility, first of all, but also comes with some risks. So it's good to learn from others and to think about getting some training, social media training, media training, partnering. My core piece of advice for scientists would be, don't try and do it all alone. When you plan your research project, plan for the communication component in advance before you even start the research, and budget for it. Because if you can get budget for it and funding for it, it means that you can partner with other people who are skilled, video makers or skilled writers or editors or illustrators who can just lift your science communication efforts, or even somebody who can just help you with a plan. And then very importantly, when the opportunities start to come, because we see that celebrity or visibility or even just public engagement happens over time. Usually say you take part in a science festival like this, other people will see you. You may get a follow-up media invitation. Now your story is in the newspaper. This may lead to another invitation to just go to your local community hall or to a school, etc. So when these opportunities come your way, say yes. When a journalist calls, say yes. Don't immediately hide. Some scientists are somewhat scared or somewhat worried, but say yes. But then take these opportunities seriously. Invest a bit of time in preparing. That good preparation is the ultimate confidence builder and the ultimate key to success. And over time, like with anything else, like with running or playing the piano or whatever, you get better, you become more skilled, and you get successes. It's possible that not every interview will go exactly as you hoped, but you learn from every opportunity and you become better over time.
What a wonderful answer, Marina. Really so articulate. I must say, just as a rejoinder, there were a couple of researchers and scientists at our festival who, when asked about their interest in SciComm and public engagement, they did say that, while they are interested in public engagement, not every scientist needs to be forced to do it, but it does become the responsibility of the scientist or the public or the researcher to just make their science more accessible. If they don't do it themselves, they can allocate a budget for it, or just plan their research in a manner that it can go out in the public. While they might not engage in the public engagement aspect of things themselves, they must cater, maybe look for a communicator who will do it for them. So that's actually a very interesting point that you made. And that leads me to my next question. Our attendee has said, why do some researchers completely shy away from communicating their science to the public? Isn't it their duty to engage with the masses, especially since science is practiced on the taxpayers' money?
Yeah, that's a good question, of course. I think traditionally, if we go way back to the middle of the previous century, science was seen as a quite a closed off profession, and scientists were kind of allowed to be in their bubble, work in isolation. But even then, even 2 centuries ago, we already see examples of scientists who broke out of that bubble and became public figures. But the majority of scientists it was sort of the norm in science to be a little bit secretive, a little bit isolated. And that's where that metaphor of the ivory tower also comes from, working in the ivory towers. They were expecting the public to simply trust them. But then, science changed and things became a lot more controversial. There were things with ethical and moral questions, genetic engineering, stem cell research, climate change. These debates that had a scientific basis spilled over into the public domain. And more, we began to realize this is not a sustainable system. So there's been a massive movement just to sum it all up from closed science to open science. And in open science, the public wants to have a say. They also say, look, you're working with our money. The least you can tell us is what you're actually doing. But very often the public wants to go further than that. They want to have a say about what is acceptable, what is ethically acceptable and morally acceptable in terms of research. So it's not possible for scientists anymore to say, just leave me alone and trust me, I know what I'm doing. So now we are in this new open science, civic engagement, public engagement era. And I think many scientists find it somewhat difficult because in their training, unfortunately, there's still not many opportunities for them as young scientists to become used to this new way of working. Because many of the senior scientists, let's be honest, the ones who are 60 plus, whatever, they're still in that older, more different, more closed off mode. But I think the good news, and this is maybe a fantastic way to think about it for the future, it's changing, and it's changing very fast. It's changing as policymakers and funders are calling more and more for engagement. And I think without a doubt, we've come a long way, but we've still got some way to go to make science truly interactive and integrated as part of society and as part of culture. But it's an unstoppable process and a force.
So we have another question over here, and maybe I'll just rephrase it a little. So there is this constant pressure, right? Because now some scientists will become celebrities, some won't. Some will be seen in live media, some won't. So how do we sort of distinguish? And is it something harmful for the other scientists because they are not being constantly seen in the limelight? And of course, there's so much of the research process and grants and say tenures that are associated with public engagement practices. So how do we distinguish between the two, and how does it affect the scientists who are not in the limelight?
It's a very, very good question. So for me, every scientist, starting out on a scientific career, you kind of have to nurture your own identity as a scientist, your brand. So when people go and Google Professor Salim Abdul Karim, for example, they're going to find, about him, information, etc. And the same is true and part of that is your academic achievements, your prizes, your awards, but also how visible you are in public. And as I said before, it's definitely not the same for all scientists. You find some that are just natural, good communicators, and they will just do it. They're just talented storytellers and speakers. Others are better at writing. There are some who really, really battle with it. And for them, it may be better to be part of a team, or to get help, etc. But I agree with people who say, scientists shouldn't be forced. If it's part of your grant conditions, for example, that you have to do some engagement, then you can certainly get help with that aspect, and you can still play a role by providing the information, etc. But what I do believe, though, this is for me the key thing, is that scientists who do make the effort to engage, and here I'm not talking about becoming, public household names. I'm talking about engaging in your community, going back to your own school, speaking to the journalist in the local newspaper of the town where you work, etc., becoming a role model, just engaging with people, just responding to opportunities, very importantly, taking part in events like this. If you do it, and if you do invest the time and effort in doing it, over time, not immediately, but over time, it's going to bring you some benefits. the next time you apply for a grant, you can list the things you've done, and you can show your grant funders that you are taking this seriously. The next time, you are looking for a partner to help you write some, you already have a list of names of science writers or journalists that interviewed you. So it's part of networking, and it's part of building your scientific career. And so scientists who do this, they experience these extrinsic benefits, we call it. They actually find that it helps with fundraising, it helps with recognition, it leads to more citations of their work because people find out about their work and go back to their original articles. But very importantly, and maybe the last thing I'll say, is it also leads to what they call intrinsic benefits. Just many scientists have told me they get tremendous satisfaction from engaging with the public, from seeing how people enjoy their work, seeing the light in their eyes. They love speaking to children, the excitement in the audience and all those things. So these benefits over time should be enough then to sustain you to want to do more. And I've seen that, and that is what I hope for, that scientists they won't need to be pushed. They will want to do it because they experience these wonderful, tangible and intangible benefits.
Thank you so much, Marina. I really wish we had the time to take more questions because they're just pouring in. But in the interest of keeping up with the time that we have at hand, I'd like to extend a very, very heartfelt thank you to you for being a part of India Science Festival. And on the last concluding note, I'd just like to ask you, what do you think is the role of public engagement platforms such as India Science Festival in connecting science with society? What do you think is the role of such events in bridging the gap between science and society?
Well, Shruti, there are so many benefits of events like this, networking, science communicators and scientists getting to know each other. But I think there are many that I could list, but maybe the one that I would like to single out in this context is giving scientists that platform. Because for many scientists, suppose I wanted to engage with a group of people today about celebrity scientists, it's very, very hard to arrange these opportunities for yourselves, the logistics. Many scientists don't have the time to do that. But if a science festival organizer or a science center or any other platform like this invites you to come and speak, or sometimes you even have the opportunity to approach them and maybe offer a talk, it takes away a lot of the time constraints and a lot of the demands from you. It gives you a ready-made platform. It's like a gift for a scientist and a science communicator. And it's really, it builds on a culture of engagement. And over time, these events, capturing what you do, capturing the audience feedback, it provides a rich source of data and information that we can learn from for the future, that we can do research on. If you look at the science communication literature, there's a lot of research about science festivals and similar events that we can learn a great deal from. It helps us to understand the motivations of scientists, the benefits, the risks, how to do better in future. So I'm a big supporter and fan of events like these. And that's also why I was so excited to participate today.
Not as excited as us. It was so lovely speaking with you, Marina. An absolute pleasure to host you at the festival. And I can only hope that things get better in the coming years and we're really able to host you offline on ground in India, where you're able to connect and engage with, SciComm practitioners and science communicators in India on a much closer level and are able to impart your wisdom to everyone, because the kind of knowledge that you have been disseminating, it's absolutely fantastic. And I only wish there were more SciComm practitioners like you spreading the word for SciComm. So thank you so much. It was such a pleasure hosting you here.
Thank you again, and best wishes for a most successful event in the following days, and I'll be watching closely.
Thanks so much, Marina. An absolute pleasure.
Thank you. Bye-bye. And thank you also to the audience for your questions.
Thanks, Marina. Thank you so much. And with that, I would like to thank all of our attendees for sticking by. This was day 5 of India Science Festival's 3rd edition. We're online and the festival is themed around continuum. We're looking at where we've come from and where we're headed. Before you leave the webinar room, please make sure to check out the feedback form that we're dropping in the chat right now. It would be lovely to hear your thoughts and comments, and we're very eager to improve our events in the coming years. So please do tell us what you thought about our events. We have a very interesting social media contest going on. If you can take a screen grab or a screenshot of the event that you're tuned into, put it on Twitter, on Instagram, tag us, use the hashtags ISF 2022 and SciComm. Tell us what you really liked, and the best tweets and Instagram stories get exciting prizes. So do participate. The next event that we have at ISF is a science policy workshop, where we are going to be demystifying science policy, and the ISF moderators will drop a link in the chat. This is a closed door meeting. Please make sure to make a note of the link in the chat. We'll now be moving to this link where our workshop facilitator will demystify science policy for us. So thank you for staying tuned. And of course, we have so many events lined up in the coming days. The festival is on till 23rd January. We have a super cool quiz tomorrow with the comedian Kumar Varun. And the quiz is called Inquisitive India, and it has a lot of cool lifelines, social media. It is going to be very, very engaging because Kumar Varun is going to preside over the quiz along with 2 experts, and it's going to be very, very exciting. So make sure you tune in for that tomorrow, and of course head over to our website to look at all of the events that we have lined up. Our events are free for all, absolutely open to everyone. There's something to do for everybody at India Science Fest. Make sure to tell your families and friends, your colleagues, tell everyone about the festival, and do join us in this massive celebration of science. I'd request our moderator to drop the link of the next event again in the chat so that everybody can see it once more. And with that, I'll see you in the next meeting room. Thank you so much for joining in. Have a great evening.